Hi, this is Chris with PhoneArena, and today we'll be staging a cruel battle between what are otherwise two devices on the same team. The Galaxy S5 may be the new kid in town, but the Note 3 has sure stood the test of time so far, and it continues to turn heads left and right. In fact, so great appears to be the Note 3's appeal that, in our experience, even non-phablet lovers end up being too compelled to pass up on this otherwise large device. And while the Note 3's signature S Pen remains a controlled territory, the Galaxy S5 sure brings along more than enough perks to cause some serious soul-searching for those of you looking for a new device. Indeed, with a fingerprint scanner, a heart rate sensor, a promising camera, and a dust and water resistant body, the Galaxy S5 is sure to intrigue you. So which one is the better buy? Let's dive in and look for the answer.
Right off the bat, you can tell these two are Samsung devices through and through, despite looking slightly different. The new Galaxy S5 is a more bulky version of its predecessor, but it's still a similar and pleasantly rounded slab of a device. Samsung ignored the Who's More premium challenge, so to speak, and is back with even more polycarbonate than before, and that's a needed sacrifice to obtain that IP67 water and dust resistance certificate. That said, one is unlikely to confuse the Galaxy S5 with anything other than a high-end smartphone. And while the front of the S5 proves true to Samsung tradition with its signature physical button that now doubles up as a fingerprint scanner, the rear is noticeably different. The manufacturer has decided to skip over faux leather this time around and has instead treated the Galaxy S5 to a perforated back. Truthfully, this is a change, but nothing more than that. Anyway, while still on the topic of the back, you also get the typical Samsung carving for the camera sensor, and below that, a shared slot for the flash and the heart rate sensor. Looking at the Galaxy Note, we have a very similar approach. The front, once again, hosts the physical home button, and the navigation keys are once again physical. Flipping the phone to take a look at its back, we again have polycarbonate trying to be fancy. The plastic faux leather rear is obviously trying to emulate the feel and looks of real leather, and actually surprisingly successful. That said, there will inevitably those who feel like that's a cheap way out. Not at all surprisingly, with the Galaxy S5, Samsung is making its first step beyond the current 5-inch standard for a flagship. The manufacturer is keeping put, however, when it comes to the pixel count on the 5.1-inch AMOLED panel nestled in the Galaxy S5's body. The resolution still sits at 1080p, which now works out to 432 pixels per inch. In comparison, the otherwise great 5.7-inch AMOLED display on the Galaxy Note 3 has no choice but to concede the title of one of the most capable panels out there. With a resolution of 1080p, the Note 3's pixel density works out to 386 pixels per inch, so it offers the less crisp viewing experience between the two. The screen on the Galaxy S5 is also the brighter of the two, but not by too much. But that's about where the Galaxy S5's clear advantage ends. When in standard mode, which is a color calibration profile, both displays exhibit a cold core temperature of almost 8000 kelvins, which is pretty far from the optimal value of 6500. In result, whites appear bluish. Moreover, both screens display a typical AMOLED behavior. Greens are overblown like nobody's business, and colors are, overall, just oversaturated and incorrect to say the least. That said, gamma is pretty excellent at 2.25. South Korean company's signature TouchWiz interface has seen a refresh with the S5 and is now decidedly flat in comparison with previous versions. It's cleaner and arguably more visually attractive than ever. Best of all, this didn't cost the custom software in terms of functionality, and there really are more options than ever. So you still have the regulars like Air View, Air Gesture, Smart Scroll and Pause, and even S-Health, which has now grown into a full-blown fitness and wellness hub, storing the number of steps you made daily, along with burned calories and even heart rate measurement histograms made available through the new heart rate sensor. With a few days of using the heart rate monitor behind us, we can certainly say that you go through a trial and error period, but eventually you start getting the hang of it, and it actually works well for the most part. That said, we're still unsure as to why Samsung chose to include one in the Galaxy S5 in the first place. Anyway, another far more useful and practical feature is Download Booster, which combines your LTE and Wi-Fi connections into a single force, allowing for even faster downloads. But by far the most interesting new feature accompanying the Galaxy S5 is the fingerprint sensor embedded into the physical home button. In our tests thus far, we've probably had about 90% success rate, which is acceptable, though we were pretty annoyed at the fact that anything but a perfectly vertical swipe would fail to register. This makes unlocking your S5 one-handed a frustrating affair unless you register your thumb's fingerprint sideways in the settings menu from the get-go. Looking at the Galaxy Note 3, the software's design cues scream outdated. Of course, it most certainly must be pointed out that it won't be long until Samsung pushes the updated UI to the Note 3 globally, but for the time being that's not the case. So what then does the Note 3 has to offer today to make up for the lack of fancy graphics? As one of Samsung's most popular lines, you can bet that it has a few aces up its sleeve. We're talking about the Note series signature S Pen, of course. Clicking the S Pen's embedded button or simply taking it out of its slot will fire what Samsung calls Air Commands. Air Commands is a dynamic window that allows you to perform 5 quick tasks, including Smart Memo, which is a fancy note-taking app with a lot of custom built-in AI, along with Scrapbooker, which allows you to crop websites, add notes to them and even save their URLs, and also ScreenWrite, S-Finder, and finally even Pen Window, which lets you create mini versions of certain apps so that you can multitask better. Bleeding edge hardware, that's where it's at with the Galaxy S5 and the Galaxy Note 3. With a fancy all-new Snapdragon 801 chip with an Adreno 330 GPU by Qualcomm and 2GB of DDR3 RAM on board, the Galaxy S5 leaves little room for concern with performance. The quad-core chip, clocked at 2.5 GHz, is simply put a monster when it comes to pushing any kind of tasks, and it does all of that without any visible stutter. Whether you're looking at super heavy multitasking, watching 1080p video, or simply immersing yourself with the latest, most graphically intensive 3D action game titles of the Play Store, you're looking at a no-compromise experience. The same kind of accolades extend to the Galaxy Note 3 as well, despite its now older 2.3 GHz quad-core Snapdragon 800 chip. Qualcomm's previous hard hitter also sports an Adreno 330 GPU, though it does fall behind in areas such as sensor image processing speeds. Where the Note 3 wins out, however, is the RAM department, as it's packing the whopping 3GB of DDR3 RAM. Despite the difference in their model number, the two Qualcomm processors both offer close to unsurpassed web browsing experience. What's more, you'd be seriously hard-pressed to actually tell the difference in load speeds and page rendering between the Snapdragon 801 on the Galaxy S5 and the Snapdragon 800 on the Galaxy Note 3. Beyond the tiny advantage in the benchmark scores, the silicon power in both devices is pretty much on par. We have a similar stalemate when it comes to the plethora of connectivity capabilities offered by both devices. Both, for example, make use of the latest USB 3.0 standard, and they're also equipped with Bluetooth 4.0, assisted GPS, infrared blasters and NFC. It also kind of goes without saying at this point in time that both also support 4G LTE speeds of up to 150 megabits per second. Excitement was palpable when we set out to compare the cameras found on the backs of the Galaxy S5 and the Note 3. Not only does the Galaxy S5 come packing some intriguing camera tech, but the Note 3 for its part has also proven itself a highly competitive camera phone. So let's talk specs. The new S5 packs a 16-megapixel ISOCELL sensor with a fairly wide f2.2 aperture and an LED flash. The camera also comes with a super quick face detection autofocus and a boatload of functionality that we'll go through in just a bit. Looking at the Note 3 next, it sports a less impressive sounding 13-megapixel sensor with f2.2 aperture and of course an LED flash. But before we get to comparing the shots these two configurations produce, let's take a moment to talk about the interface. Once again, thanks to its newer TouchWiz interface, along with some extra functionality made available by the new hardware, the Galaxy S5 manages to properly differentiate itself from the Note 3. Not only is the new UI slightly rearranged, but you also get new shooting modes exclusive to the S5, like Selective Focus and 3D Tour. The former does exactly what it advertises. The shooter snaps several images with different focus in a quick succession, allowing you to then choose between front, rear or pan focus. As for 3D Tour, just think of Google Street View. You basically continuously snap photos as you move about in the real world, creating a string of connected images. But while the Note 3 may not have these new too fancy modes, it achieves a draw with the S5 in basically every other aspect of functionality. To that end, both have the same pick of additional shooting modes, including panoramas, dual shot, sport, sound and shot, and even more. With the interface out of the way, let's take a look at what both these capable snappers can produce. For starters, the 16-megapixel snapper on the Galaxy S5 delivers more detailed and sharper results than the Note 3's, and at least the former shouldn't be a surprise. The trade-off here is the relatively noisier pictures that the S5 produces, even at the same ISO levels. The S5's ISOCELL sensor also spits out snaps that look more dynamic next to the Note 3's, and it can also definitely be said that the software algorithms governing the unit do a better job of judging the proper exposure needed to capture a fine shot. This slight superiority also extends to color reproduction, an area where the Note 3's photos seem a bit washed out in comparison. That said, it should be noted that the Galaxy S5 does tend to produce slightly oversaturated colors, yet the effect is not needle in the eye. Looking at video capture, the sensor on the Galaxy S5 again proves an evolutionary step forward. Like with stills, the Note 3's 1080p video clips are characterized by blown-out highlights and overall less dynamic scenes in comparison, even though both tweak their exposure levels quickly and adequately. Watching any type of video, including movies, on either the Galaxy S5 or the Note 3 is actually a fairly feasible endeavor. Thanks to their crisp and larger than average 1080p displays, both Samsung phones offer just enough of screen real estate to stream all the action too. That said, this is obviously the Note 3's game due to its big 5.7-inch glass. As for the built-in multimedia apps both come packing out of the box, we saw no reason for complaint. Both phones' gallery and video and music player apps bring to the table essential functionality with some extra perks on top. Gallery app on both then can look for and recognize text in photos and provide a clipping of it thanks to the optical reader function. This can come in handy and is the kind of functionality you definitely don't take for granted. Lastly, we again have two competing versions of Samsung's TouchWiz at play here, and we once again have to point out that the latest iteration of the company's software is arguably the more eye-pleasing. Much alike the Galaxy Note 3, the Galaxy S5 suffers from the same shortcomings when it comes to call quality. So while the volume levels the earpieces on both devices are able to output is respectable, this does come at the expense of clarity and tonal fidelity. Thankfully, toning the volume down helps noticeably. As for the microphone, we again have a very clear draw. Though audible and loud, our callers complained of rather robotic voices with both devices. Moreover, while our voice sounds overly flat through the Note 3's microphone, there is also a rather unpleasant crackling noise that accompanies our voice through the microphone on the Galaxy S5. Said more explicitly, neither of these Samsung flagships gets top marks, but they're still better than the average out there. In a typical Samsung fashion, both devices come with user-replaceable batteries, though those differ in their capacity. The physically smaller device of the two, the new Galaxy S5 comes with a relatively small 2800 mAh cell, which Samsung rates good for 21 hours of talk time and a little over 16 days of standby time on a 2G network. In comparison, the Note 3's 3200 mAh battery offers the superior 25 hours of talk time and 22 days of standby time on a 2G GSM network. And yet, despite the differences in cell size, the Galaxy S5 has a unique advantage over the Note 3 called Ultra Power Saving Mode. This special feature of the S5 should prove quite handy when you're low on battery and away from your charger, as it builds upon the now standard power saving regiment. Said otherwise, apart from enforcing more frugal governance on the processor and limiting connectivity and the choice of available apps, the Galaxy S5's vibrant AMOLED screen can actually go completely monochrome. This, as you can imagine, should help with battery life when you're really low.
With this lengthy comparison now behind us, do we dare claim we have enough to arrive at a verdict? Sure, but it's not really as simple as that. It would be easy to say that beyond size considerations, the Galaxy S5 is the better overall device of the two, but size never really left the equation now, did it? Whether it's the larger 5.7-inch screen and more spacious battery, or the inclusion of the S Pen stylus and the plethora of functionality accompanying it, this is always going to be a hard call unless you're certain of the form factor and type functionality you're after. But a larger screen is definitely not an advantage for everybody, and not all of us really need a stylus. If that kind of thinking applies to you, then it's safe to say that the Galaxy S5 will have the clear advantage here. It reaches a stalemate in the design department with the Note 3, but it has the advantage of a water and dust resistant encasing. Thanks to an all-new fingerprint sensor and heart rate monitor, the S5 is also arguably the slightly more functional of the two. Moreover, it sports a tad more potent Snapdragon 801 chip, allowing for super fast image sensor processing times. Speaking of images, that's another step where the Galaxy S5 proves more capable. It offers no revolution, mind you, but an evolutionary step forward in the camera department is really hard to argue. Once again, this was Chris with PhoneArena, thank you for tuning in.